They say hospitals are where life begins and where it ultimately ends. For 67-year-old Clara Collins, her old life ended right there in the sterile, brightly lit lobby of her local emergency room. Her sudden demise didn't come from a failing heart or a terminal disease, but from a deafening silence she never saw coming. It came from the very person she had given life to, walking away as if Clara was nothing more than someone else's problem. This is the story of a mother's ultimate heartbreak, but more importantly, it is a story of a stunning reclamation. Emily thought she was discarding a helpless, burdensome old woman that day. She had no idea that her cruel abandonment would ignite a quiet, calculated response that would strip Emily of everything she felt entitled to, leading to an ending neither of them could have ever predicted. The tragedy began on a morning that felt just like any other, except for a physical fragility Clara couldn't shake. Emily hadn't bothered to visit her mother in weeks. Clara had been dealing with a lingering, tickling cough, but nothing that seemed too violent. However, on that specific morning, a sudden bout of severe lightheadedness washed over her. Scared and seeking a sliver of comfort, Clara decided to call her daughter. She didn't just need a ride to the doctor. She just wanted to hear Emily's voice, a simple reassurance to remind her daughter that she was still here, still breathing, still needing her. Emily finally answered the phone after 5 long rings. There was no warmth, no panic, no maternal concern in reverse. "You don't sound good," Emily muttered into the receiver, sounding as if she was already halfway out the door and entirely inconvenienced by the disruption. She didn't pause to ask what was wrong or how her mother was feeling. She didn't say she missed her. Instead, she issued a cold, clipped command: "Get dressed, I'll pick you up." Clara, ever the accommodating mother, should have known right then that something was terribly wrong when her distant daughter offered to drive her so abruptly. When Emily arrived, the atmosphere inside the car was suffocatingly tense and eerily quiet. They barely spoke a single word to one another during the drive. Emily kept her dark sunglasses firmly planted on her face, even though the sky outside was dull and overcast. Between them sat Emily's purse, where her phone buzzed relentlessly, once, twice, then 10 times in a row. Emily stared blankly at the road, not even glancing down to check the glowing screen. Breaking the heavy silence, Clara gently asked if they were going to the ER. "Lobby's faster," Emily snapped back sharply, her tone devoid of any empathy. "They'll triage you anyway." Clara simply nodded and folded her frail hands in her lap, shrinking herself down. She had never wanted to be a burden to her only child. She tried to convince herself that this harsh, abrasive behavior was just Emily's unique way of showing she cared, not sweet, not soft, but at least it was something. Upon reaching the hospital entrance, Emily pulled the car directly up to the drop-off curb. "I'll park," she stated, her lips almost twitching into a fleeting, unnatural smile. "You go in, I'll meet you inside." Clara took those words as an absolute promise. She walked through the automatic hospital doors holding nothing but her small purse, her breath tight in her chest, not from her illness, but from anxiety. She gave her name at the front desk, and a nurse politely offered her a wheelchair. "She'll be in shortly," Clara proudly told the staff. "My daughter." The staff just nodded politely, having undoubtedly heard similar reassurances 1,000 times before. Then the excruciating wait began. 30 minutes dragged by, then an hour, then 3 long hours. Every single time the automatic lobby doors slid open, Clara's hopeful heart jumped into her throat, only to sink a little lower when a stranger walked through. Panic slowly setting in, she pulled out her phone and dialed Emily's number once, then twice. By the 3rd desperate attempt, Clara was met with a voice that delivered a cold, mechanical finality. "This number is no longer in service." Clara didn't shed a tear. Her face remained entirely motionless. She just sat there staring blankly at her phone screen, hoping the cruel reality of those words might magically change if she just blinked long enough. Confused, she flagged down a nurse and asked if there had been a car accident out in the parking lot. The nurse, looking sympathetic, asked carefully, "She dropped you off?" When Clara nodded, the nurse lowered her voice and gently broke the news. there was absolutely no record of her daughter ever walking into the building. Clara sank back into the hard plastic waiting room chair, her fingers curling tightly around her purse. The physical dizziness was completely gone. Instead, a deep, hollow ache settled into her chest, residing in the painful gap between what she thought she meant to her daughter and what she truly did. 3 more hours passed under the harsh, buzzing fluorescent lights as Clara drank a lukewarm cup of apple juice given to her by a pitying volunteer. When Clara finally stood up to leave, the sun had already gone down. She walked out of the hospital on legs that didn't even feel like her own, wide awake to a devastating new reality. Emily hadn't left her because she was sick. She had abandoned her simply because Clara still believed that she wouldn't. That night, following the devastating abandonment at the hospital, Clara sat heavily on the edge of her bed, still wearing the exact same clothes she had worn to the emergency room. She didn't even bother to take her shoes off. She just sat there and stared intently at the phone resting on her nightstand, as if it might suddenly ring and her daughter's voice would tell her it was all just a sick joke, a terrible mistake, or a bizarre miscommunication. But silence has a brutal, devastating way of making things real. It was on that silent, heartbreaking night that Clara finally reached down and opened the old metal box hidden under her bed. This metal box was a sacred archive of her motherhood. It was the one that held all of her important documents, fading photographs, and the sweet, handcrafted cards Emily used to make for her when she was just a little girl. Clara sifted through crayon-colored hearts and messages that read "World's Best Mommy" and "I love you more than all the stars." One of the handmade cards still had pieces of glitter stuck to it. Holding it in her hands nearly broke Clara's spirit, but as she looked through the box, she realized that memories aren't always soft. Clara's mind drifted back to all the profound, life-altering sacrifices she had made for Emily. She remembered willingly skipping dates just so she could attend every single one of Emily's PTA meetings, not just once, but always. She remembered how Emily's intensive school projects seamlessly became her own personal projects. She recalled how paying for Emily's tuition had ruthlessly drained every single cent Clara had to her name. To keep her daughter afloat, Clara had to borrow money, exhaust herself by picking up substitute teaching jobs, and simply go without the basic comforts most people took for granted. Emily never fully knew how much her mother bled to keep her shielded from life's cold, unforgiving edges. Clara hadn't even told her daughter when she was offered a chance to remarry on 2 separate occasions. One of the men was incredibly kind, and the other man was quite wealthy, yet Clara had politely said no to both of them. She turned them down because Emily needed her, and at the time, Clara genuinely believed she needed nothing more in this world than her daughter's love. But the beautiful dynamic of their relationship fractured and changed forever the day Emily met Marcus. Marcus possessed a slick, superficial charm, a charm that Clara astutely compared to oil sliding over glass. To Clara's face, he was always perfectly respectful, but beneath the polite surface, Clara could feel a dark, unsettling truth radiating from him. He clearly saw her as entirely inconvenient. He viewed Clara as a burdensome relic, stubbornly attached to the woman he wanted to completely reshape. Marcus once said to her, wearing a hollow, unconvincing smile, "You've done so much for her. But now it's our turn to take care of you. Let us do that." Yet, he never once looked Clara in the eyes when he delivered those supposedly comforting words. It sounded a lot like kindness to the untrained ear, but Clara had spent her entire life reading between the lines, and she knew that wasn't love. That was strategy. After Emily and Marcus tied the knot, the familial ties rapidly began to sever, and things significantly shifted. Phone calls came less and less, and in-person visits became increasingly rare. When Clara lovingly offered to help decorate the couple's very first home, Emily coldly informed her that they had already hired a professional designer. Emily's exact, dismissive words were, "You've done enough, Mom. Relax. Just enjoy yourself now." Clara wasn't trying to be controlling or overbearing. She was just desperately trying to stay included in her only child's life. The most glaring red flag, the moment the sinister plot truly began to surface, happened during a dinner about a year ago. Clara had invited both Emily and Marcus over, spending the entire day painstakingly preparing Marcus's absolute favorite meal, a savory lamb roast with rosemary. When dinner was finally served, Emily barely touched the food on her plate. Even worse, Marcus took a phone call halfway through the meal and rudely never came back to the table. Later that night, as Clara was quietly clearing the dining table all alone, she accidentally overheard a conversation that would haunt her forever. Emily and Marcus thought Clara was fast asleep in the other room. Through the walls, Clara heard Marcus's voice, low and profoundly irritated, complaining, "She's just sitting there like furniture. I get that she's your mom, but how long is this going to go on?" In response, Emily whispered something back. Clara couldn't hear the entire sentence, but she distinctly caught 7 chilling words that she would never forget. "She won't be around forever, you know." Clara lay awake in bed that night, desperately wondering if she had imagined it and praying that she did. But her absolute worst fears were confirmed the very next day when Emily abruptly started asking her about her will. There was no delicacy, no polite context. Emily just bluntly asked, "Have you written one yet?" When Clara cautiously asked why she was bringing it up, Emily casually brushed it off, claiming it was just to be prepared. A mere week later, Emily casually brought over official papers, not even bothering to put them securely inside an envelope. They were house transfer forms. Emily handed them over with a fake smile, saying, "Just in case." Clara didn't smile back. Instead, she took the papers, folded them neatly, and slipped them inside that same metal box, refusing to mention them ever again until the fateful day in the hospital lobby. She realized that she had given her daughter absolutely everything, but perhaps in doing so, she had accidentally taught Emily that she would accept absolutely anything. In the agonizing days following the brutal abandonment at the hospital, Clara stopped checking her phone entirely after the 5th day. Her lack of phone checking didn't stem from blinding anger or even profound hurt, but rather from a suffocating emptiness. It was a silence so impossibly wide that she could actually hear her own heartbeat echoing inside it. She made no attempt to call or text Emily, nor did she ask why she had been left behind. Clara knew that at her age, when the person you raised forgets your name in their soul and not just their mouth, the why becomes completely irrelevant. The what now is all that remains. Her lonely days morphed into a hollow, mechanical clockwork. She watered her violets at 7, ate toast and marmalade at 8, watched the news at 9, and took a seat by the window by 10. That window became her entire theater, where she watched children with sticky faces running up and down the street, delivery vans buzzing by, and the neighbor's dog barking at pigeons as if it were on payroll. Life went on, as it always does, but Clara did not fully move on. She moved slower, she didn't sleep much, her food lost its taste, and the vibrant colors of the world dimmed around the edges. She wasn't experiencing the clinical kind of depression. She was just painfully aware of a dark truth she didn't want to know. Her daughter did not care if she lived or died. The absolute breaking point, the shocking discovery that would finally shatter the stillness, arrived courtesy of her dear friend Maggie. Maggie and Clara had been close friends since 1983, having used to teach 3rd grade right across the hall from one another. Maggie knew Clara before she was a mother, and sometimes Clara believed Maggie knew her far better than Emily ever did. One fateful morning, Maggie dropped by holding a bag of almond croissants and wearing a face that practically spelled trouble. "You won't believe what I heard," Maggie said, brushing urgently past her. Clara didn't flinch, simply replying, "Try me." Maggie pulled out her phone and showed Clara a short, blurry video of a home tour. Clara stared in horror. She was looking at her own living room, her own curtains, but her personal photos had been entirely removed from the walls. A realtor was narrating the video, stating brightly, "The owners are doing a light remodel to prepare this charming home for its future as a rental." Clara stared at the footage as if it were a bizarre scene pulled from someone else's life, and asked aloud, "Owners?" Maggie nodded slowly and revealed that the contact number listed on the post was Emily's. Emily and Marcus were actively planning to rent out Clara's beloved house while Clara still lived in it. Clara hadn't been asked about this, nor had she signed anything authorizing it. Suddenly, Clara understood that this was never about love. It was entirely about location, assets, and control. Emily wasn't just distancing herself, she was actively planning Clara's quiet exit. Clara called the county office that same day and asked about the title status of her home, breathing a sigh of relief when she found it was still under her name, thank God. But she knew then what she hadn't wanted to believe. Emily was banking on her dying slowly, silently, and conveniently. She didn't block Clara's phone number in a moment of frustration. She did it because Clara was no longer useful. Sitting down that night with a hot cup of weak tea, Clara stared at the wall where our last family photo used to hang. She had taken it down herself last winter, not because she didn't love her daughter, but because she couldn't bear the lie anymore. The smiling woman in that frame, and the daughter whose hand rested on her shoulder like a promise, wasn't real and hadn't been real in years. Yet, Clara felt no urge to scream, fight, cry, or beg. Something inside her, something old and sharp, had finally woken up. She had been erased politely and gently, but now she was going to write herself back in on her own terms. The exact moment Emily left her at that hospital was the moment Emily lost control, and Clara realized her daughter wouldn't figure that out until it was far too late. You don't need to scream when you've already been silenced. You just need to listen long enough to know when it's your turn. After Maggie left that fateful afternoon, Clara sat alone at her kitchen table. She had nothing but a pen and the weight of 50 years of life behind it. She wasn't interested in drafting a messy revenge plot. Instead, she drafted a precise correction. Her first call was to a lawyer named Richard, a quiet man who had actually been one of her former students. When he warmly answered the phone, Clara simply stated that she needed to update her will and wanted it sealed completely airtight. Next, she contacted the bank, meticulously moving every cent of her savings from the joint branch she had opened with Emily into a private account. This new account was placed under a trust name Emily didn't know existed. Ruth Light, named after Clara's resilient grandmother who had buried 3 children and never once bowed to pity. She then closed her safety deposit box and burned old, meaningless papers, including letters from Marcus, laced with fake kindness and birthday cards that had started to feel like hollow invoices. To ensure her new legacy was secure, Clara made a difficult phone call to her late husband's brother, Daniel. They hadn't spoken in 15 long years due to an old family argument, but when they met for tea, Clara told him the entire truthful story of her abandonment. Daniel was horrified, whispering that she had given Emily her life, only for her to hand it back in pieces. Clara quietly corrected him, stating that Emily didn't hand it back, she just dropped it and walked away. Clara then handed Daniel a folder containing her revised will, the new trust, the deed to her house, and an envelope with a name written across the front, Lee Harrove. Lee was a girl Clara had taken in briefly years ago when she was 12, a sweet foster child who affectionately called her Mama C. Clara had tracked Lee down a month earlier, discovering she was now 29 and a hardworking single mother to a joyful little boy named Eli. Finding immense hope in their reunion, Clara quietly named Lee as the executor of her estate, ensuring Emily wouldn't receive a dime. Emily finally came back after 92 days of absolute silence. By that time, the silence had matured into pristine clarity, and Clara had already successfully sold the house. Emily confidently rang the doorbell as if nothing had happened, acting as though they had merely had a silly disagreement over curtains. Clara calmly opened the door wearing her Sunday robe, a cup of tea steady in her hand. She didn't flinch or smile, she just politely let her daughter inside. Walking in as if she still lived there, Emily's eyes scanned the living room, noticing immediately that the old couch was gone and replaced with a single reading chair. Even Emily's framed graduation photo had been removed from the wall, and Clara's sewing machine had returned to its old spot. Sitting down uninvited, Emily tried to smooth things over with her usual slippery tone, stating that Marcus was waiting out in the car. She offered hollow excuses, claiming they had overreacted and that life was just stressful. Then came the ultimate manipulation. Emily generously suggested that Clara move into a quiet guest house with them, promising to cover everything. Clara knew the unspoken condition. This deal was only valid as long as she disappeared properly and handed over the house. That was when Clara dropped the match. She looked her daughter dead in the eye and said she had already sold the house last month. Clara revealed that the paperwork was finalized and she was moving out in just 2 weeks. Emily's carefully crafted mask completely slipped. Stunned and suddenly losing her softness, Emily snapped that they had plans and people lined up to rent the property. Clara immediately interrupted her, stating that she knew everything and had seen the rental video. "You planned for my absence," Clara said smoothly. "I'm simply honoring your request." Emily sank back down, looking smaller and less polished, shedding what might have been real tears. But Clara no longer trusted those tears. She knew she had raised a woman who cried only when cornered, not when she was wrong. Reaching into a drawer, Clara handed Emily a final envelope containing a letter of absolute truth. Clara delivered her final verbal blow. "You left me in a hospital lobby, Emily. You didn't come back. You didn't call. You didn't care. So now I don't need you to." Stripped of her control and without a single response, Emily stood up and walked out the front door without another word. She never called again. 2 weeks after that final confrontation, a moving truck pulled up to Clara's house under a sky that couldn't decide whether to rain or shine. Clara packed only the essentials: her books, keepsakes, the metal box, and her sewing machine, leaving the furniture and the empty walls behind. Before departing, she taped a gentle note to the front door for the new tenant that read, "Welcome home. She's all yours now, be gentle with her. She raised a lot of love once." Clara then relocated to a peaceful cottage outside Asheville, a place with a sunroom, a garden, and absolutely no haunting memories. Meanwhile, Emily wrongly assumed that her mother's silence simply meant closure. That illusion shattered on a Tuesday when a thick, cream-colored envelope bearing a wax seal arrived in her mail. It was the formal reading of Clara's will, sent by Richard the lawyer. As Emily read the legal breakdown, the shaking started. She learned that the house was irrevocably sold, the joint savings were entirely gone, and she wasn't left a single cent or memento. The biggest shock, however, was the name of the sole beneficiary who had received Clara's entire legacy: Lee Harrove. Frantic and confused, Emily searched for Lee online and found a photo of a woman holding the hand of a curly-haired little boy. Emily's chest completely caved inward when she read the caption. "Eli's favorite place is our new garden. Thank you, Mama see you changed everything." Desperate, Emily left frantic voicemails for the lawyer, throwing out wild accusations of manipulation and mental decline. Her efforts were entirely useless because Clara had meticulously arranged multiple witnesses and full mental competency evaluations on record. The final, devastating nail in the coffin arrived a week later as a flash drive containing Clara's recorded final statement. On the video, Clara looked directly into the camera, speaking calmly and clearly. She delivered her ultimate truth to Emily: "You planned your life around my death, so I planned my legacy around your absence." For the first time, Emily realized a horrifying truth. She had successfully rid herself of her mother, but she had lost the massive financial prize she arrogantly assumed came with it. Without Clara's assets to fund their lifestyle, Emily and Marcus's marriage rapidly crumbled. Their finances collapsed, they divorced, and Emily was forced to take a job in another city. While Emily's life fell apart, Clara's beautifully bloomed. Lee visited the Asheville cottage frequently with her son, Eli, who affectionately called her Granny Clara out of pure love, not obligation. In her blooming garden, Clara purposefully planted 2 rose bushes on opposite sides of the path. She named one Second Chances, and she named the other Never Again. Clara had finally built a smaller, softer, and safer world where she was no one's burden and only loved. The valuable lesson for the listener. Clara's journey leaves us with a profound lesson about love, boundaries, and self-respect. As Clara came to realize, some children are not your future. They are your lesson. Society often conditions us to believe that a parent's love must be unconditional to the point of self-sacrifice, but that does not mean you must tolerate being treated as a disposable burden. You can give someone the entire world, but if they hand it back in absolute silence, it is never too late to walk away, rewrite your story, and build a new life for yourself. Ultimately, as Clara beautifully explained to little Eli, giving doesn't always mean keeping, but loving doesn't always go to waste. It simply means finding the right people who truly cherish the love you have to give.